Hello, welcome back to Behind the Faders, the lifestyle channel. Today I want to talk about reverbs, but before we get into that, may I ask those of you who like watching my videos and haven't subscribed yet to catch up on that? Because still 80% of the people that are watching my channel are not subscribed. And it's just a little click for you and it helps me so much. So thank you. Reverb. Reverb in lifestyle mixing can be a tricky task because we most of the time have to deal with some sort of room reverb, and it's hard to predict how our reverbs will interact with the room reverb. And for everybody who's been in this business for a while will have had this experience that you program a desk file, you put all your clever reverb settings into it, and the second you walk into the venue, you know you can flush all of that down the toilet because you have a massive room reverb and there's no point of adding any more reverb to it. And when we're lucky, we are in a dry room. And the most impressive experience I ever had about that was I was doing a festival in Hamburg at the airport, the Hamburg airport days a few years ago. And my stage was built into a huge hall which was completely dead, completely anechoic. And it was a hall where they test plane engines. I think it's called an anechoic engine test chamber. Although it's not a chamber, it's a big hall. And when I walked into there the first time, it was kind of scary. This big hall completely dead. Now, of course, they built in the stage into it and then all the trussing, and then they had some food trucks and they had some small planes for decoration. So it became a little bit more live, but not much. So it was drier than any club I've ever been in. It was even felt a lot drier than an open air or anything else. And using reverb in that room was kind of fun, but also I saw quite a lot of sound engineers that came in with well-known bands that were anywhere between surprised to shocked about the way their reverb sounded in there, because they probably never heard their reverbs like that. That was pretty impressive. But of course, every usual venue has a little bit of room reverb, which is a lot more natural than a completely dead room. So let's start with the different types of reverb. The biggest differentiation between reverbs is reverbs that are artificially created and reverbs that are modeled after a real room, which then get divided by room sizes. So chamber, room, hall, church even, with little special case is an ambience, because an ambience is just the earlier reflections of a room reverb. Most small digital desks, I know, you don't have the full variety of options. Very often you only have room and hall. So no ambience, no chamber, no church really. And I once got the question from somebody asking why sometimes his room or hall reverb sound kind of unnatural. And that's because there's more to the parameters than just decay time and maybe pre-delay. And you should keep your decay time within the range of that type of room. So if you have a room and you crank up the decay time to 4 seconds, it's not going to sound, it might sound great, but it's not going to sound natural. And the same goes for maybe a church reverb, and you take it down to 0.6 seconds or so. Again, might make sense, but it's not going to sound very natural. So when it comes to artificially created reverbs, then we have plate and spring. But again, most of the time you will only find a plate reverb in the options of your reverb plugin in your desk. So what is a plate reverb? A plate reverb was invented by the German company EMT in 1957. Before then, all the reverb you had were echo chambers in big studios, where they had a speaker and a microphone in a very reflected little chamber. So the plate reverb was a big metal plate, 2 meter by 1 meter, weighing 600 pounds, and it had a driver in the center. So audio was fed through that driver into the plate, which started vibrating. And then there were 2 contact microphones at the outside, at the end of the plate, that picked up the reverb. And spring reverbs are pretty much working the same, only instead of a metal plate, they were using two springs. So while plate reverbs can be used on almost anything, it's a rich, bright, nice reverb. The spring reverb has a very twangy, strange sound to it, and at the beginning of the reverb process, it's a kind of fast tremolo effect. So it's very special and can only be used on pretty special signals. That's probably why you don't find it a lot in reverb plugins in your desk. So how do we apply reverb to our signal? Of course, you could put it into the insert of a channel, but what you usually do is you send an aux send to the reverb, and then you return the reverb onto a stereo channel, which has a lot of advantages. First of all, it's easier to control because if you have the reverb on the insert, now you have to set the balance between the dry signal and the wet signal with this dry-wet control. And that's a lot easier to do on a return fader. Plus, if you have a reverb on vocals, you want to mute it in between songs, and it's just a whole lot easier on the channel than on the plugin itself. Then second, you can send more than one signal to the same reverb, which you will do very often. And the third advantage is you can actually EQ your reverb, and you should. And while there usually are some parameters on the plugin itself that let you EQ it in a way, that's easier on the channel. And what you should do is, we don't want harsh treble on our reverb, and we don't want muddy lows. So what I always do is I use the old Abbey Road trick, the so-called Abbey Road trick, which is you roll off the lows of your reverb at around 300 Hertz, and you roll off the highs of your reverb at like 5K. Nobody needs 8K in a reverb. So that way you get a rich, full, nice reverb. So let's go through some instruments, shall we? Let's start with the snare. For the snare, you usually use a plate reverb. I think in most reverb plugins you will find a snare plate. My default decay time is usually around 1.6, and I take it from there. I know some people kind of take the tempo of the song and set the decay time to that tempo exactly. Feel free to do that. I don't do it. I have my default decay time, and it works for most songs really, most genres, most tempos. But then of course, if I then have a big slow ballad, I might even bring it up to like 3 seconds or something. Pre-delay, you might play with it a little, see how it changes the character of your reverb. Just make sure you don't get over 30 milliseconds, because above 30 milliseconds, you can now detect two different signals. So you will have like a flam effect, so you hear the attack twice. So stay below 30 milliseconds and play around with it. The other parameters, well, everything that deals with EQing you did on the return channel. If you find your reverb not really cutting through the mix, you can take the diffusion down, because high diffusion means loads of reflections, which makes for a very smooth, even reverb. While if you take the diffusion down, it gets a little more edgy, punchy. Might want to try that. On toms, you can most of the time use the same reverb. I have a little trick on toms, but unfortunately that trick only works if you have the good old Phil Collins gated reverb, which is, as far as I know, only available in old Yamaha effect machines like the Rev 5, Rev 7 and SPX 90. Everything that came after that, so from the SPX 900 on, they got rid of this very specific gated reverb. But if you are lucky enough to have one of these machines, or find some plugin that has a gated reverb like that, I sometimes put it on top of the normal reverb on toms to just reinforce the attack a little bit. And it doesn't work all the time, like so many things, but when it works, it sounds really, really great. Vocals, you can also use a plate. Like I said, you can use a plate for anything, pretty much. But I use pulse on vocals, and I usually start with a decay time around 2 seconds, which also works on many occasions. Of course, it's genre dependent and tempo dependent, but as a default setting, it works pretty well. Now with the pre-delay. That's a special thing for vocals. We all know if you put a reverb on something, it makes us feel that the signal is further away from us. And you don't want that on a vocal. So what you have to do is use a pre-delay and not just a little. You have to get, in this case, other than on the snare, you have to get over these 30 milliseconds. So the reverb comes after the dry vocal. Just imagine we are in a church and I'm standing on the other end of the room. And now I'm saying something. And now my voice and all the reflections will arrive at your ear at pretty much the same time. That's how you know I'm far away, even with your eyes closed. If I'm now standing right in front of you in the same room and I talk to you, you will have my dry voice, and after that comes some reverb from the reflections. And that's what you want to create with this pre-delay. And by the way, if you use delays on vocals, don't forget to send the delay back to the reverb, so the repeats have the same kind of room on them than the initial signal. If you have backing vocals, you can use the same type of reverb, but now you have a shorter pre-delay because they want to sound further away from us than the lead vocal. As for other instruments that might need some reverb, like maybe acoustic guitar, a saxophone or a flute or whatever it is, I will then use a room reverb just for another character of reverb, because I have plates on my drums, I have hall on my vocals. So now I use room. But that's just my preference. I mean, you can, like I said, you can use a plate on anything. I usually prepare a file with a plate reverb, a room reverb, and a hall reverb. So I just can quickly go through them and see what sounds best at the end of a day. And last but not least, a question